This video is about Empire of Ash, the upcoming Doom of Valyria prequel TV series to Game of Thrones. It's the third of 3 faction profiles I'm making, and this one is on the faction known as the Freeholders. The Freeholders are rich merchant princes, bankers and magisters, the local elites, below the Dragon Lords, but above the slaves. They're not Dragon Lords, they don't have dragons, but that isn't their strategy. Their strength is money, they're the richest faction, so it's money as power. And they're not so much one unified faction as an alliance of various sub-factions that came together in common cause, merchants from all over the Valyrian freehold. As a result of that, the subgroups are very diverse and interesting, and over half of them aren't white. The Freeholders' strongest power base, geographically, is the Valyrian province in Sothorios, Fantasy Africa. It's analogous to Roman North Africa, this province in revolt against the capital region. The POV character for the Freeholders is a matronly Asian woman in her 50s, a former slave herself, taken from Yiti, their version of China. She worked her way up from nothing to become the richest single person in the Valyrian freehold, so now she's a major political player and influencer, and one of the leading freeholders. The headquarters of the Freeholders faction is specifically the regional capital of the Valyrian province in Sothorios, a major port city, Zammit. Let me zoom in on it's at the river delta. Now, Zammit, the regional capital of the province in Sothorios, they stated that it's the wealthiest city in the entire Valyrian freehold after Old Valyria itself. It's more important than Volantis. So, because it's the biggest and wealthiest colony, logically it became the main hub of the Freeholders as a faction. Their headquarters and strongholds. So that's why, well, they have to meet somewhere. They're not just fighting all over the freehold. There are certain provinces where they could rise in a rebellion because they're far enough away from Valyria and have enough of a power base. Zammit controls the shipping lanes coming back from Yiti. The direct comparison, they then stated, was it's like a cross between Roman Carthage and Constantinople. It dominates all the trade routes coming back from the Far East. You know, I kept saying before that, it's like Constantinople, it's a melting pot of different peoples. Why is it a melting pot? Because people come in on trade routes. So if you haven't heard of Yiti before, Yiti is their world's version of Imperial China. It's where you find ethnically East Asian people. That when people go, you don't have a lot of East Asian people in this, well, it is like medieval England in Westeros. But there are Asian people in this world. They're in Yiti. They are the oldest continuous civilization in the world, since the Long Night itself, 8,000 years ago. They are older than the Valyrians. The Valyrians only started conquering and expanding some 5,000 years ago. And, in contrast to that, the Valyrians were destroyed. The Yiti is still going strong. That they have a continuous 8,000-year history. That everything is, times 10 in the book series. Everything is bigger and larger than life. That if you think about how medieval Europeans looked at, wow, look at what a vast history China has. That they never had a Dark Ages. That they had civil wars now and again, but nothing that destroyed their written culture. It dialed their civilization back to zero. That when you have a society that's that old, and you get really refined courtly manners and rules of behavior and cultural courtly sophistication. They are the most sophisticated culture in the world, China or Yiti. That they mention that the royal palace in their capital city is the size of King's Landing. And the only reason they're not the most powerful world-conquering empire ever is they didn't have dragons and the Valyrians did, but they're older and a lot more advanced. And they, probably one of the reasons why the Valyrians couldn't easily conquer them, not just that they're far away, but they're strong in magic as well, that this is a great civilization which is the hero of its own story off to the east, that they barely hear of in Westeros. Economically, why is it important to be on the shipping lanes coming back from Yeti? Yeti is the main source of silk in the world. That they don't make silk in Westeros or the Free Cities or Valyria. Silk is imported from the exotic lands of the East, and ultimately all of it from Yeti. So, and this was stressed to me, the Freeholders as a faction can come from all over the Valyrian Freehold, and indeed the rest of the world. But their new faction in the Civil Wars has its leaders gather to meet in Zammit. Their representatives come there. And Zammit has a sizable number of immigrants from Yeti and the Summer Isles, just moving along the shipping lanes. With all of that setup out of the way, now I want to go over the Freeholders POV character in detail. As I said before, she's from Yeti, and she's the richest person in the Valyrian Freehold now. But to give you the exact wording of the leak, which is now up on Game of Thrones Wiki, she is, quote, a self-made former slave, a deceptively matronly-looking East Asian woman in her 50s, that's now not only one of the richest citizens, but also a major political leader and government intrigue player. And this isn't just my inference, these are the words of the series Bible, that there's short character descriptions at one point that my source read off to me and said, make sure you get the wording right, so we went slowly through it. So feel free to pick this apart. This is the direct words of the series Bible for what they might mean by that. And there's a lot packed in here, more so than the other two POV characters. The Sphinx's POV character, all I know is that they're homosexual, and I don't even know if they're a man or a woman, and that was interesting. I made a whole video on it, but more about the phenomenon of that Valyria really tolerates homosexuality on a societal level, not as an individual. I don't know much about them. The Young Dragon's POV we know a bit more about, that she's this biracial female dragon rider who's half Valyrian and half black, and that's a great idea. It really exemplifies the difference between the Sphinxes and the Young Dragons, that the Sphinxes are the old blood aristocracy who need to keep the bloodline pure and don't marry foreigners, and the Young Dragons, they're soldiers out in the provinces who sometimes they do marry foreigners and have mixed-race children. And the conflict about that, of what does it mean to be Valyrian, that's a great idea, but I don't know much about her beyond that in terms of her specific political alignment and backstory of, well, exactly how did she get in this point. I made a video on her too, the Young Dragons one, spent time speculating she might be a cousin of the Targaryens, or at the very least she's their political ally. We shall see, but this has a lot of detail in it for the Freeholders POV character. So I want to go through this step by step, picking it apart. And this is all just fan art from various other things I just got from Google image search because I thought it fit well enough. Like, someone else reporting on this used an image of an Asian woman from Magic the Gathering cards, so I use that here. This is all just placeholder artwork. I don't have specific images from the series Bible, guys. But moving ahead with this, first, what A Song of Ice and Fire characters is she similar to or might be inspired by? Because sometimes Martin reuses similar tropes. And I said before that the Freeholders are merchant princes and magisters, like characters from the Free Cities you see like that. So, bits of Littlefinger in her DNA, of, using money to manipulate people, more so, on a generalized level, more so like the Magister from Pentos, Illyrio Mopatis, or Tycho Nestoris, the head of the Iron Bank. People who they're not aristocratic lords, they use money. But she's of that sort of world, but only in a generalized sense. That really, strongly, the A Song of Ice and Fire character she seems most inspired by is the Widow of the Waterfront from Volantis in Book 5. So much so that I exclaimed to my source, she sounds like a Chinese version of the Widow of the Waterfront. And I meant that as a compliment, that this sounds like a great idea, that they didn't use this character in the TV show, this season 5, when they just burned through Volantis. They really stopped all the world building, and they cut out so many subplots where this isn't really adapting it anymore. You're just cutting out good material. That I missed that we never got the Widow of the Waterfront as a character. And now, not only do we get a spiritual successor of sorts, but she's a main cast member. So if you didn't read the books, who is the Widow of the Waterfront? Well, she's this major power broker on the docks of Volantis. I mean, a major figure within the city, but she's not an aristocrat. She's this powerful lowborn who, through trade, rose up. And Tyrion doesn't know who she is, so when he's passing through Volantis, he meets her and has this whole chapter with her. It's the 7th Tyrion chapter in A Dance with Dragons. And they explain to him, the Widow of the Waterfront. She is the widow of Vogaro, who was 7 times a Triarch of Volantis, very rich, power on the docks. Whilst other men built the ships and sailed them, he built piers and storehouses, brokered cargoes, changed money, he was a moneylender, and insured ship owners against the hazards of the sea. The Dragon Lords are powerful because they have dragons. Some of the freeholders and magisters are powerful because they sell insurance. That low fantasy realism thing of some of them are just bankers. Well, anyway, Vogaro, he dealt in slaves as well, and when he grew besotted with one of them, a bed slave who was trained at Yunkai in the way of 7 sighs, it was a great scandal. And he took her for his paramour, and it was a greater scandal still when he freed her and took her for his wife. And she became his business partner, and after he died, she carried on his ventures. So she went from being a slave to the powerful wife of one of the leading men of the city to she inherited his businesses, and she was good at it. And the way he describes her, I think a lot of the powerful women in Martin's writings might be inspired by his grandmother Grace, who he said ruled his household with an iron hand, but he really liked her. That he says, the Widow of the Waterfront, we don't learn her real name. She is elderly, but her eyes are black and bright. And because she was a former slave, it was decades ago, you can see that under one eye she still bore faint scars where a knife had cut away her tattooed tears. They give tear tattoos to mark pleasure slaves, so when she was freed she had them cut off like 40 years ago. So you can see these faint scars on one of her cheeks where she had her slave tattoo removed. And it says, she spoke with a voice as sinister as it was soft. And she spoke the common tongue of Westeros well, with only the trace of an accent. And it keeps saying she's vulpine, fox-like, with a savage smile that's almost feral. And she's very cunning, and even Tyrion respected her intelligence. More quotes from the chapter. Tyrion did not fail to note how well chosen her customary table was in the merchant's house. Solid stone at her back, a leafy alcove to one side for entrances and exits, a perfect view of the inn's front door, yet so steeped in shadow that she herself was nigh invisible. And when Jorah threatens her, she goes, "Keep your silver, I have gold. And spare me your black looks, sir. I am too old to be frightened of a scowl. You are a hard man, I see, and no doubt skilled with that longsword at your side. But this is my realm. Let me crook a finger, and you may find yourself traveling to Marine changed to an oar in the belly of a galley." She lifted her jade fan and opened it. There was a rustle of leaves, and a man slid from the overgrown archway to her left. His face was a mass of scars, and in one hand he held a sword, short and heavy as a cleaver. "Seek the Widow of the Waterfront," someone told you. But they should have also warned you, beware the widow's sons. That she has this small army of bodyguards that they call the widow's sons. And she's a major figure in this one chapter. He interacts with Tyrion a lot. That she proceeds to give a long and detailed assessment of the political situation in Volantis, the future actions of each of the 3 ruling triarchs and their chances in the upcoming elections, and how the slavers' war against Daenerys will play out, which faction is going to do what. So she isn't just strong or a player because of her demeanor. but her intelligence and political savvy. This is why this book character, who has never appeared in TV, has a fairly substantial fan base that people remember her off the top of their head from who have read the books. So she seems inspired by the Widow of the Waterfront. I've seen a lot of people saying that independently of me. Just anyone who read the books will know this is an iconic character. Next step in picking this apart. Why it's important that the Freeholders POV character is described not just as rich and a political player, but deceptively matronly. I love that they said it that way. The Game of Thrones showrunners openly admit in the DVD commentaries that they stopped writing coherent fictional characters and are just showing off the actors' talents. And you see their staff parroting this, that when they asked Taylor, the director, why does the White Hunt make no sense, like 2 months ago, he just outright said, well, guys, sometimes you have to show off the actors. And it amazes me that more people haven't picked up on this. They openly say, I am randomly maneuvering these characters around to show off the actors giving strong performances, which quite literally means randomly mugging powerful face. I mean, you've seen this. Look how powerful they're being. They're mugging a powerful face at the camera while talking in a stern voice. And the writers genuinely believe, there's video interviews I have on my channel of Cogman saying this is them being strong, and the interviewer's just gaping at him. And better yet, not even a stern voice with talking. No dialogue, just glaring. And that isn't my assessment. There's clips from the commentary of Benioff saying, look how powerful Cersei is in this scene, because there's no dialogue, and it's just her staring straight into the camera. You're showing off the actress. And people have been frustrated as they couldn't pick up on the pattern. Eventually you realize, try to verbalize their narrative actions. There aren't any. Increasingly, it was already bad in Season 5, horrible in Season 5. By Season 7, it's obvious to people who aren't even watching the DVD commentaries that, I write up stuff for Game of Thrones Wiki. If you had to write down in text what is happening, free of looking at an actor frowning really hard while the music is swelling, nothing is going on in the plot. It's not that I disagree with it. This is truly incoherent, and if you tried to describe what was Sansa's Season 7 storyline, you really can't. Good or bad. It was nothing. And this was starting by Season 5, that you saw so many people going, look how powerful Sansa is for killing Ramsay with dogs. How is she powerful for killing a man already tied to a chair? He was already defeated. That isn't what power is. And again, videos on my channel, so much stuff in the DVD commentary of them going, look at her smirking like that. That was what the focus of the whole season was. And truly, I mean, not exaggerating, they said, we walked through that scene so many times, Sophie Turner said, planning out, timing in her head exactly how much she's supposed to grin to get the perfect grin with no dialogue. And they're meat puppets. And I keep thinking, look, she's making a powerful face and the music is swelling. Look how strong she is. Look at what a political player she is, and describe her political actions. Sansa didn't do anything to defeat Ramsay, any more than she did anything to defeat Littlefinger. And I hope people are waking up to this, people who were in denial after Season 6, go, no, she defeated Ramsay. How? That after seeing the incoherent Littlefinger thing of just, she's glaring at him, that's defeating him? I hope you realize that retroactively this is exactly the same thing that happened with Ramsay. She's just talking to him in a stern voice, and they think this is her outmaneuvering him because they're actor fanboys. And it's not, so many people are they're trying to deflect the criticism. It's not that they think violence is power. I'm not criticizing that she killed him. It's that they think strong face is power. It's not, oh, you're again, people, oh, you're saying revenge is good. It's that in terms of her narrative actions, whether good or bad, they don't add up logically. Events just randomly fall into place so the actress can give strong face, talking in a stern voice. So it's not, oh no, she had Littlefinger's throat cut, look how revenge is bad. It's, she didn't do anything. Bran was apparently the one who used magic to find out he did it. How is that her outsmarting him? So, and you've seen this, and I know someone's going to do it in the commentary here. I am preemptively mocking them. People who tried to defend or explain what she did with Ramsay and now with Littlefinger, it's become desperate. They end up, when they go verbalize what she did, they end up degenerating into incoherent word salad. If you look into the comments right now, if there's someone who I haven't deleted already going, no, what she did was, well, she was moral support to Jon, and no, what were her decisions that resulted in this? And no one knows. To the point, a lot of reviewers didn't even know what was supposed to be going on between her and Arya in Season 7 and Littlefinger, that it was truly incoherent, but particularly because they were editing some scenes out. Just word salad. And by way of overlap, the same thing was going on with Arya for a couple of scenes, but now it's obvious even to casual viewers in Season 7 that the whole scene where they're yelling at each other, people even wondered, is this fake? For Littlefinger's benefit of his spies, it makes no sense. Well, Arya is being strong in it because the actress is talking in a stern voice and talking powerfully. But you had to write down what she's doing. Arya didn't do anything any more than Sansa did. And they keep saying, she's badass, or Sansa's badass. She's a badass bitch. To the point of meaninglessness. The word badass has become meaningless. I've actually seen professional writers on Twitter complaining out of context, but I'm pretty sure they're talking about Game of Thrones. If the only word you can use to describe a female character is badass, you haven't written a good character. That is a broad term. You need something specific. You know, they're strong. That is a cliche of, well, she's strong. Can you give us some more agency, something specific along those lines? So with Arya, it turned into the Maisie Williams show. And what did she do in Season 7? She had this giant fight scene, training scene with Brienne, just showing off, look how cool she is, and this is Maisie making faces. Brienne, for that matter, used to be this amazing, basically female knight on this quest to find the Stark girls in Seasons 3 and 4, and explain what Brienne did in Season 7, and on the red carpet and stuff, they go, hey, you were so cool this year. Doing what? She has no role in the narrative. She exists to make cool faces. I'm making a stern face, therefore she must be powerful. Another example of this degeneration is the Tyrell women, with Olenna and also Marjorie to an extent, that in Season 3, when they were still going by the books, or at least in the tone of the books, even if they weren't quoting verbatim dialogue, that's more or less what they act like. And she isn't yelling in a stern voice to get what she wants to intimidate people. She's in her garden, having lemon cakes, and interviewing people, figuring out information, and politically manipulating people. And by Season 7, I was stunned at how many people this turned into a meme. We're reacting to her death scene of "Tell Cersei, I want her to know it was me." And this turned into fan art, meme art, and their t-shirts of, look how badass Olenna is with, like, badass sunglasses and stuff, and it's on t-shirts. This wasn't Olenna being strong or powerful, much less a political player. It's just the actress talking in a stern voice, making strong face, while the camera zooms in on her and the music is swelling. Actually try to list off in words, in writing, what she did in her death scene that made her strong, much less a politician. Describe what happened. Jaime outmaneuvers the Tyrell army to take Highgarden by surprise. somehow, which is a whole other issue, and forces Olenna to commit suicide, and he's nice enough to give her a painless poison instead of torching her to death, as Cersei would want to do. That she is completely outmaneuvered and defeated, and her enemy confronts her and forces her to commit suicide, and then with her dying words, she insults him by boasting of how she killed Joffrey, his son. That's what happened, objectively. How was this Olenna winning politically? She's defeated. She is literally dying. Her cause is lost. Her home and her faction are destroyed. And people kept saying, look how badass she is. If badass does exist, it is a character's skill and actions, not their demeanor. And I think it's just that anyone who knows the difference abandoned the show long ago. Every show that falls apart, final season of Lost, Battlestar Galactica, final season of Heroes, the only people left are the fanatics offering blind praise, and anyone who can notice, this is a massive plot hole. Dragons don't fly that fast. Why could they outmaneuver all of the Highgarden army? Such people left long ago. You will always have the loyalists as the last ones there. That's why they're loyalists. But this is intellectually insulting. And they did it to every character, male or female. It hurts more because when they did it to women like this, of just talk in a stern voice, that means you're powerful. In the books, and why Martin is such a praised writer, he wrote women as politicians more than just yelling. A lady's armor is courtesy. That was Septa Mordane's instruction to Sansa, and Book Sansa still mentally repeats it throughout her chapters, even into the later books, as sort of her power mantra, that even when she's in the Vale and she's dealing with Harold Harding and the Vale Lords, remember your lessons, that a lady's armor is courtesy, that she keeps being courteous in the face of people who don't trust her or that she wants to manipulate somehow politically. Major theme here, and tying in with that, preview samples of the prequel compendium Fire and Blood were put out in the weeks leading up to its release in late 2018, not that long ago. And after all this time without new content from Martin, and just the later seasons of the show with strong face and stern voices, we got an excerpt focusing on Queen Alysanne's visit to the north. And this is free online. I'm going to put it in the links in the info box below if you haven't read it already. Please do. It's nice writing. And it was fascinating to see how many TV-first news sites and reviewers who haven't had the TV show for a year, haven't had the books for longer, were very interested in just oohing and ahhing over her character. Just, wow, she's using soft power and courtesy. That when Lord Stark, Alaric Stark, doesn't really like her, his brother died in a rebellion that was indirectly caused by them, and he gives her kind of a stern welcome to Winterfell, doesn't really like her, she just uses her courtesy as her armor and is still nice and trying to offer up something else he might want to try to work her way into his good graces. And by the end of it, the charm offensive works. Her diplomacy works. Diplomacy and courtesy. That people had forgotten there could be characters like this. Good Queen Alysanne Targaryen is the template for the powerful adult female rulers in the books. The kind of historical figure that Sansa wants to be like, that I think Martin is showing her growing into. And Martin said she's strongly inspired by Eleanor of Aquitaine, as played by Katharine Hepburn in The Lion in Winter, which if you haven't seen, watch it. It is an amazing film. It's got everyone in it. It's got Peter O'Toole, Katharine Hepburn, a young Timothy Dalton, a young Anthony Hopkins. Everyone is in that. I think any great medieval show and prequel writer should at least watch it. That the verbal sparring and the backstabbing and the switching sides back and forth, this is what a TV show should be like. But he said she's like Katharine Hepburn in The Lion in Winter, and told this is official artwork of what she looks like, that she looks like Katharine Hepburn. And her power is her intelligence, her diplomatic manipulation, her manipulation cloaked in courtesy. We don't know what the Long Night prequel will be like, but I'm stunned at audiences who just assume and project that it will have strong female political players with zero evidence. And I'm not too surprised. We saw this in the later TV seasons. Every time they go, we're going to have great stuff from the female characters this year, and then we don't, and they just can't mentally process that. Or the fact that they're not telling us that much about Long Night reminds me of how they didn't really tell us much about TV Dorn in Season 5 before they don't put out previews of movies that are about to bomb because they're terrible, because they don't want to tell people what's wrong with them. And I could be wrong. They're not talking about it. It will probably try to have characters like that. It has female writers in it, female directors. Good for them. I'm not talking about the production staff. I'm talking about the fans that trust but verify. That we have this habit. The casual fan base has this habit of projecting all their hopes onto things with no evidence, when all rational evidence says stop trusting these people, or at least wait to hear more about it. Again, thinking of TV Dorn. Or how every year they'd say, this is the year Sansa does something important. The people who have already built this up in their minds based on nothing. I'm talking about the fandom, not the production staff. That Naomi Watts' character is only described in one short sentence as a socialite hiding a dark secret, not a politician. And she could be, but based on that alone, please tell me about this in the comments. I'm sure you've seen it. We see wholehearted, firm belief that it differs from person to person, believing, well, obviously she's Lan the Clever. Obviously she's a Stark Queen. They can't be both. It's not obvious if two different people come up with two different explanations. This firm belief that she's everything from a warrior queen to a female Lan the Clever. Why? This is blind speculation and blind faith that they're going to get this right. What Sophie Turner said in an interview just a few weeks ago. I know I say this every year, but Season 8 is when Sansa becomes a real political player. And the cynicism of that, because we all remembered her in the lead up to Season 5 really hyping, Sansa's going to go from pawn to player this year, and then she's this imprisoned rape victim, and everyone's like, what are you talking about? You hyped us up for months. Then she'd say it before Season 6, Sansa didn't really do anything, showing how hollow her build-up was for Season 6, which a lot of people were trying to tout as, no, she defeated Ramsay when she didn't. She'd then start saying before Season 7, oh, she's going to fight Littlefinger, this is when she really becomes a player. Wait, you're admitting that killing Ramsay wasn't you being a player. You do realize by saying it's going to happen that you're admitting it never happened? Up to this point? So, as we see trailers and previews and interview hype for Game of Thrones Season 8 and the Long Night prequel HBO is pushing, remember, I really talk about this in the comments, I want you to remember in your mind's eye just how exciting and promising the Season 7 trailers were. For this great plot line in Winterfell where Sansa becomes a player and outmaneuvers Littlefinger. How did that turn out? Just people projecting what they need onto things. And I don't know how Naomi Watts' character is going to turn out. And nothing against, I don't know enough about the writers to complain about this. It's just, based on one line of stuff, people have built up Naomi Watts into the greatest queen Westeros has ever seen. Based on nothing. And we've been burned before by HBO. How do you know that they're not really selling Long Night to us? They're saying, this is the prequel, deal with it. And in denial, people are just pretending that we're getting more than we are. We really haven't learned much about this cast of characters. So, given all of that running history we have with how they've dealt with this, it means a lot that Empire of Ash promised a female POV character who isn't just strong or even a political player, and they said she is a political player, but that they used the phrase deceptively matronly. This was very important to me, and thinking on it more deeply impressed me and gave me a lot of hope. There's, oh, well, you don't have much to go on for... No, we got a lot to go on for Empire of Ash. It was a big leak. I mean, it's a paragraph description, but there's a lot in there versus she's a socialite. Versus, well, she's this political player, but she rose from nothing. She was a slave, but now she's incredibly rich, but she's deceptively matronly. That is a lot to go on for this character. That it really convinces... They're not going to confuse actor talking in a stern voice with fictional character who is powerful because she can intelligently lead or outmaneuver other people through her decisions. That's what real narrative agency is. So when they said deceptively matronly, just it reminds me of Olenna. It reminds me particularly of the Widow of the Waterfront. It sounds like it's in the spirit of the best written female characters and political leaders from George R. R. Martin's books. Next point to pick apart is her race. That I talk about this in other videos. This was really hammered home that a major focus of this prequel is on diversity. That the older Valyrian aristocrats don't want to share power with all of the provinces and immigrants to the provinces from other places, and it's this multi-ethnic democratic state. What does it mean to be a Valyrian? I talked about in other videos that there's these mission statement essays in the series Bible, laying out what they intend to do, and some of them talked about how, in strong words, this show will avoid mere tokenism. That you can't just have, oh, that one marginalized gay character like how Loras became marginalized in later TV seasons. You need to have a core cast member who's gay if you want to be diverse. So the Sphinx's POV character is gay, or the Young Dragon's POV character is a biracial half-black dragon rider. That in some ways I can actually respect something that says, like, it's set in ancient Scandinavia, and logically there wouldn't be any non-white people in this, so we left them out. If you're making a case for historical accuracy, or something in, like, pagan Ireland, something really ancient, Druids, I can get that and even respect that more than someone who says, I put a black character in one episode of a 10-episode season who had one line of dialogue and was a minor character. Why aren't you praising me for my diversity? The hypocrisy of that. I actually would respect a show that said, due to my commitment to historical accuracy, I don't think I can it would be unrealistic to put in a non-white character in this. I talked about all this in another video where David Oyelowo, a prominent actor, was complaining, the fact that you have one black character in it for one line of dialogue means you could have potentially focused on him more and chosen not to. This is worse than if you made the argument that they wouldn't fit historically at all. It's just the lack of effort, that you aren't really... That tokenism is worse than doing nothing in some ways, because it's lazy and intellectually insulting. So, given how, even relative to the books they were adapting, non-white characters like the Dornish or other black characters from the East were marginalized in the show, on multiple fronts they're saying, we are going to avoid mere tokenism. It needs to be the core cast. Now, it's an ensemble show, so there's like 24 to 30 people are listed as starring cast in any Game of Thrones season. But, like, Indira Varma for Ilaria Sand was technically starring cast. Or Missandei is technically starring cast. But the core 7 that are called Tier A, the Stark children, the Lannister children, and Daenerys, that they said, if we want to be real diversity and representation and not just half-assing it, which pleases no one, you need to make, like, a Jaime scale character who is gay, and that's what the Sphinx's POV is. Or who is black, like the Young Dragon's one. And Empire of Ash avoids mere tokenism by making one of its core cast East Asian. That she's not just a recurring character, she's the face of the Freeholders faction, one of their ringleaders, if not the leader. And going to the map here, I can see the argument that Martin put out, just if your setting is pseudo-medieval England, there wouldn't be as many East Asian people there compared to black people or Semitic Middle Eastern people. But then you could go to what they do in the books. They go to Dorne, which is their version of medieval Spain. I think it's inexcusable that the show cut out so many black characters from the books. Versus, well, Yi-Ti is really far away from Westeros, and that comes to the whole debate of, well, should you write a book like that or not? Well, he's reflecting the travel concerns, but nonetheless, whether there should have been more East Asian characters or not. He wrote a lot about Yi-Ti in the World of Ice and Fire. I'd like to see more. Point is, Valyria is further east than Westeros, so logically they're in closer contact with Yi-Ti, and it makes perfect sense that you would see people from Yi-Ti in a show like this. That we've seen the Free Cities and then Slaver's Bay, and the farthest east the narrative actually went was Karth, which Yi-Ti is as far east of Karth as Slaver's Bay is west in that region, and Karth is the farthest east that traders from Westeros go, but you see Valyria is closer to it. And you can make the argument that, well, if Valyria is Rome with dragons, that Rome was never in that much contact with Han China. They knew of each other. It was distant. Well, yeah, but Martin is having fun. That wouldn't it be cool if they were in a little more contact? That officially in the books, Valyria was in regular trade contact with Yi-Ti. They knew of each other closer than real Rome and China did. That there was one emperor of Yi-Ti who married a Valyrian noblewoman, and they kept her dragon at his court. They said they traded with Valyria fairly frequently. So that's just part of the book universe. If anything, they're more diverse than the Middle Ages were, the amount of trade going on with Valyria and Yi-Ti. Zooming in here, what can we see about the region and what is Yi-Ti like? You see it's east of Karth, and there's their capital city, Yin, and there's Lang Island. That they've established this is how the trade routes work. I talked about this in a previous video, that you see ships go east past Karth, then they go west past Sothorios, past Zammit. So, because Zammit is on these trade routes, there are a lot of people from, they said there's a sizable, the POV isn't the only East Asian person in Zammit. They said there's a sizable number of immigrants, and sailors and shipping concerns that are on the docks. So that you'll see a number of Yitish people there and learn quite a bit about their culture by looking at this exclave of them in Zammit. And just moving along the trade routes, that if you're going, well, how could someone like that be that far west? Well, I think Vikings, the Vikings TV show in season 4 did that, where there was the character Yidu, who she's a slave from China. That she was sold from one person to another along the trade routes, along the Silk Road, which, fine, that's plausible. So basically, she started out like that character. She moved along the trade routes as a slave, somehow got freed, and I assume somehow, like the Widow of the Waterfront, worked her way up to becoming this power broker. So she isn't just an ethnically Yitish person living in Zammit. She was born in Yi-Ti. She's from Yi-Ti. She was sold as a slave from there. And that's important. That it's not just, oh, well, I'm Grey Worm. I was born in the Summer Isles, but I have no memory of it because I was taken as a slave. She's from Yi-Ti. She remembers. So an interesting question is, well, what do we know about what Yi-Ti was like during this time period? 400 years before the War of the Five Kings, 400 years before Game of Thrones. As it happens, we do know of a big event that was happening in Yi-Ti around 400 years ago. It wasn't just the middle of a 1,000-year-long era of peace where not much happened. The books also mention that, as it happens, 400 years ago, the time leading up to the Doom of Valyria, this is when Leng broke away from Yi-Ti's control, which would have been a major event in their history. Leng is loosely comparable to Japan, maybe Taiwan a bit. It's this large island nation, and it was colonized by people from Yi-Ti and ruled for many centuries, but 4 centuries ago it successfully rose up in revolt against the mainland and broke away, and they've been living under their own rulers ever since. Now, Yi is the oldest civilization in the world, 8,000 years of continuous history since the Long Night, and compared to that, Valyria is only 5,000 years old. In that time, they've been ruled by 11 different dynasties. And this explains this in their chapter in the World of Ice and Fire. Please go out and buy that if you haven't already. The shortest of these dynasties lasted half a century, while the longest lasted 700 years. And it says, on 4 occasions, the fall of one dynasty wasn't immediately followed by a new one, but prolonged periods of civil war and anarchy, the longest of which lasted over a century, which you read this and you go, oh, it's like the Three Kingdoms period in China, this prolonged period of civil war. At the time of the War of the Five Kings, Yi is ruled by Bu Gai, the 17th of the Azure Emperors, that they're all associated with a color for their dynasty. And at least by the end of this, they're comparatively weak, like the late Han Dynasty, that it says, by this point, for the Azure Emperors, true power is really held by the local governors and princedoms who are all acting independently and fighting each other as they please. Given vague hints, which I wrote this up in the wiki article, it would take longer to explain, I suspect that Leng broke away during the time when the dynasty that preceded the Azure Emperors was collapsing. Possibly the Maroon Emperors, because they mentioned, well, they broke away from this other capital city when it was happening. I think it was the Maroon Emperors, don't hold me to that. That if you think, well, when did the Azure Emperors start? That when did the last one collapse and they start? Well, if you take 400 years divided by there have been 17 emperors, you get an average of maybe 24 years on average for each emperor, which is plausible. The time frame is plausible for when did the Azure Emperors start, that they probably started maybe 400 years ago. So my point of all this is that Yi in the years leading up to the Doom of Valyria seems to be going through, as they say, interesting times. It's not this long era of peace where nothing happens. There's apparently chaos and civil war. At the very least, that this is the time when Leng successfully revolted against their rule, and given the time frame, not just that, the time frame hints that this might be an era when the old dynasty might be outright collapsing. That it's not just a war with Leng, but that on the mainland they're being torn apart by civil wars. So things are going on there, at the very least war with Leng. So it appears the POV character is from Yi, but was sold into slavery, then got traded along the shipping lanes until she was purchased in Zammit, and then worked her way up to become very rich. This is my speculation. They didn't tell me this, but talk about it in the comments. More of a would be nice. What if she was sold into slavery because her family was on the losing side of a civil war in Yi? I mean, we know Leng overthrew its governors from Yi around this time, and maybe her family were governors from the mainland who were ruling over Leng, who got overthrown, and she was sold into slavery as a result. Now, as I said in the other video, they did tell me we will use flashbacks as a narrative device, because that is normal. TV does that. The Game of Thrones avoided that, and later the writers admitted, well, we don't use flashbacks because we're bad at them. They said this in the DVD commentary. And the books extensively use that as a framing device. So they said, well, we will have flashbacks. So they could easily have flashbacks of characters from the Summer Isles showing the Summer Isles, or for this POV character, they can have like an extended flashback episode of her remembering what it was like when she was young as a child, when she was in Yi. It's not the focus of the show. But like how Westworld Season 2 had a one episode focusing on Shogun World, or the one with the Native American character was an extended flashback of his life up to that point, showing his village, away from the other characters. So given their framework, they could very plausibly have an extended flashback episode where she's showing, well, there was a war in Yi and my side lost and I got sold into slavery. We'll see what happens, but I think they could easily do that. And not just her. As I said, there's a sizable number of immigrants from Yiti in Zammit, maybe even from Leng or from other lands around the Jade Sea. So you could have her talking with other East Asian actors, characters who are from Yiti about how political events are playing out in Yiti, that she'd be interested in what's going on in the latest news from the docks, of talking about, oh yeah, the current emperors who overthrew my family, or something like that. So you could have two characters talking about it just in a room in order to inform the audience of wider events. As for how did she go from being a former slave to the richest person in the entire Valyrian freehold, well, George R. R. Martin wrote a couple of characters who rose from nothing. It's a bit of a trope he likes. How Varys was once a slave and is now the royal spy master of Westeros, or his friend in Pentos and the streets. Illyrio, a common sellsword, rose to be a powerful magister of Pentos. Littlefinger, who rose from just being this minor lord from nowhere. And, of course, the Widow of the Waterfront. That I think she did what the Widow of the Waterfront did, and rose like that. Now, I talked in the other videos a bit about what I thought might have been historical inspirations for some of these characters and factions. They didn't tell me this, I'm reading into it. Like, that, the impression I got from how they're handling the freeholders in Sothorios, which is Fantasy Africa, seemed heavily inspired by the real-life figure Mansa Musa, the Sultan of the Mali Empire in Western Africa, or how the Valyrian factions are based on the real factions in the Roman Senate. As for the Freeholders POV character, this East Asian woman who rose from nothing to be this powerful merchant princess, they didn't tell me this, but it really seemed inspired by it to me. I think they're drawing influence from Zheng Shi, literally the widow of Zheng. She was born Shi Yang, but Zheng Shi was a Cantonese prostitute who worked her way up to being a brothel madam, then married the pirate lord Zheng Yi in the year 1801. And they became partners in crime. He relied heavily on her. She had this great skill for organization and intrigue. And she became practically co-ruler of their pirate fleet, the terror of South China's coasts. And when he died in 1807, she took over his rule until 1809, which is pretty long for a pirate. That at her height, the widow Zheng commanded 300 ships and 30,000 men. This was officially the largest pirate fleet in history. And the level of organization is what really makes it stunning, that this wasn't just a, hey, I got one ship, I'm raiding a coast and I leave. She was running an empire. That she wasn't in the pirating business, she was in the empire business. That she exacted tribute and outright taxation from coastal villages across southern China, around from Canton to Macau, and she enacted her own notoriously strict pirate code to ruthlessly maintain order among her men. Commit rape, you get a beheading. Steal from the common treasury, you get a beheading. Disobey a direct order, well, the first offense, they give you a severe whipping. The second time, you get a beheading. And really managed to maintain order that way amongst her large number of sailors. And the Widow Zheng's fleets fought and defeated the forces of the Qing dynasty, the Portuguese, and the British. Eventually, her forces were starting to face greater difficulty, and she realized it was wiser to simply quit while she was ahead. Most pirate lords in history didn't live to grow old. The famous pirates we think of didn't really have that long careers before just living a dangerous life like that. Sooner or later you die. So she realized, looking back at all of them, she's one of the later pirates, I should quit while I'm ahead. And her forces were still so strong that she negotiated an amnesty with the government and simply retired in 1809. And they didn't just give her an amnesty. Part of the deal was they got to keep all of the loot they stole. She got off scot-free. And then she went and bought and ran a gambling house in Macau, where she died in her bed in 1844, age 69, surrounded by her grandchildren. that she was probably the most successful pirate in history, certainly the largest fleet, and when you consider that she kept all of her money, got an amnesty, and died of old age decades later, that she really succeeded, unlike the ones who just eventually got hunted down and beheaded and died on the sea. So just the Freeholders POV character reminds me of the Widow Zheng, and I don't know if they're drawing direct influence, but that whole, she rose up from nothing, she was just this prostitute, to being a leader because she's really good at organization. She's a great politician, and everyone around her, her men recognize that she knows what she's doing. And how some of you might be familiar with this, not that it's a great movie, but you remember in Pirates of the Caribbean 3 when they see the World Council of Pirate Leaders? I actually talked about this in an earlier video on the Freeholders. I mean, their diversity reminds me of the World Council of Pirates scene, where you see there's the king of the African pirates, the leader of the South China pirates, the leader of the North China pirates, the leader of the French pirates, and specifically the lady who is the leader of the pirates of southern China really seems to be loosely inspired by Zheng Shi. I mean, the southern China pirates are led by this elderly widow that's clearly based on that. So you might have seen that already. So this visual really is what I keep thinking of when I think of the Freeholders Council meeting in Zammit, where there's this matronly, ethnically Chinese widow woman who's nonetheless a ruthless politician. And there's also, like, the local guy who owns who is an African black man who owns all of the local gold mines. And then there might be a representative who's a Latino woman from the textile industries of Mir. And this covered in furs northern guy from Quohor with all the timber industry guys. So there's a diverse alliance of peoples, but she is the front runner. And closing on this, it's really interesting that I've been, over the last couple of months, Googling around to see how different fan sites react to news about Empire of Ash, particularly in different languages, because we had the whole thing with trying to translate, how do you say freeholder? And I stumbled on this, that someone actually went through the trouble to translate the whole leak I made into Chinese. Not just with an online translator, but hand translated to get it right. And post one of the moderators on Zihu.com, which is sort of their version of Quora, like Reddit. And there's this whole thread about the stuff I was talking about, filled with their little reaction points going, oh, this is an interesting idea. So yes, we're going international on this. And this part where they quote me here, they had to hand translate the part where I went, it's true, it seems like these people locked themselves in a room with a copy of The World of Ice and Fire for 2 years and wrote a TV series based on it. If you haven't bought The World of Ice and Fire yet already, please do. And going down their reactions, and this is, I don't know Chinese, I had to use Google Translate, there came this part down here where you see it there. It says their reaction that another major figure is a self-made former slave, a shrewd and cunning 50-year-old Asian woman who, though not young, is majestic and intimidating. I don't know where they got that, because I didn't say that last majestic part, but she is. And she is not only one of the wealthiest citizens, but also an important political leader and conspiracy player. And they put in parentheses their reaction comment, this Chinese person is on the other side of the world from me. I strongly suspect that the archetype for the character comes from the Volantis widow of the Waterfront. So, other side of the world, in a language unrelated to mine, in raw Chinese, someone's going, wow, this character seems heavily inspired by the widow on the waterfront. It's that obvious to people. And they mean it as a compliment. We wanted the widow of the waterfront. So that's really cool. And then going down, you can see that she pointed out that this character sounds a lot like Avasarala from The Expanse, who is a very popular character. She's the Deputy Undersecretary of the United Nations, third in line to leadership of Earth in The Expanse, which is a sci-fi show. And again, a lot of people have been reacting this way, not just them, that just something as far away as China is having the same reaction as we are on our English fan sites, that a lot of people who've reacted to the leak have compared the Freeholders POV to Avasarala, and Martin is friends with the writers of the books that The Expanse is based on, that a lot of people have drawn parallels, that this is like Game of Thrones in space, with Earth, Mars, and the asteroid belt. I enjoy it greatly. It's of that style, where there's different sides, neither one is entirely good or evil, it's a lot of politics. So I can see that comparison and how a lot of people who like Game of Thrones are watching that show. However, I would point out, guys, that first, Avasarala isn't self-made. She's from a political dynasty. That they explain that her father was a major figure too. That the POV character is self-made. And on top of that, Shora Agdashlu can't actually be cast in this role, you understand, that as it is specifically meant to be an East Asian woman, and she's ethnically Persian. So when people go, oh, we'll cast her as this, well, she isn't Chinese. So, probably not. And before you start writing your casting speculations in the comments section, I want to head you off here. Guys, we can't just keep expecting Michelle Yeoh to play every major role specified as a Chinese woman. On top of that, she's already busy with Star Trek, and she's a huge Hollywood actress from Crazy Rich Asians and Crouching Tiger and all these other things before that. I mean, it's great that she's willing to do sci-fi fantasy genre stuff with Star Trek, but I think her hands are full. I mean, she's got such a busy schedule, and don't get me wrong, I think she's amazing. And this would be our equivalent of them if we woke up one day and they said, oh yeah, we cast her as the POV. That would be like when Long Night said, oh yeah, we got Naomi Watts to play our lead character. I don't think that's going to happen, just we're not that lucky. Realistically, she's got a busy schedule already with the Star Trek, and particularly with movies. These A-list movies, like Crazy Rich Asians. A true A-list actress, in Empire of Ash would be a massive time commitment. As one of the lead characters to go to Ireland for months at a time, I don't think they have the pull to get an actress of that scale. It would be nice, but there are a lot of other actresses out there. So an issue this brings up with casting is just also with markets. I have yet another video where I talk about how Netflix is really beating HBO internationally because they actually worry about, we're not just, HBO thinks of itself as a United States TV channel competing for awards. Oh yeah, let's send it off to other countries as an afterthought. Netflix sees itself as a global market and will try to tune up shows to see if, can we put in if there's a show from Spain that isn't doing well in America, let's put in an American character. If there's a show that isn't doing well in Germany, let's put in a German character. They try to make things that appeal to a global audience everywhere. And I've seen some anemic attempts by HBO to break into the Asian market, in HBO Japan, also in China now, in Korea. And, well, there aren't Asian characters in Game of Thrones. There wouldn't be in that narrative, but unlike The Long Night, which has yet to announce a single East Asian cast member, this one says, not only is there a cast member, she's one of the faction leaders. I think this would be a great idea for a prequel and would also be important in the Asian market, which is more important than ever nowadays. I talked about this in the video about Netflix versus HBO, that I'll link this in the info box below, that there was an article during Season 4 in the Wall Street Journal giving Nielsen's demographics for the racial breakdown of the audience for Game of Thrones and HBO. And the math didn't add up. And nor did they mention Asians. That it says in Season 3, the Game of Thrones audience was 13.2% black, 9.2% Hispanic, and 76.6% white. That adds up to 99%. You're saying that 1% of the audience is Asian people? And it went on to say, in contrast, the average HBO demographic for the whole channel was 16.8% black, 12.3% Hispanic, and 72.9% white, which adds up to 102%, and yet somehow doesn't mention Asian viewership, which I know would rank by number demographically behind Hispanic, but it's still zero? What is this doing? I don't understand. So just how much of an afterthought they were considering Asian audiences, both in America and internationally in HBO Japan, HBO China, and I really hope that this will help break into those markets. And when you're thinking of casting, maybe, I don't know, they should consider a Chinese national or a Japanese national, someone who is famous in that East Asian television circuit, one of their top dramatic actors who is not from the American stable of Asian actors, but international Asian movie stars. People, I probably haven't heard of, but who are big there, because this is kind of made with an eye towards appealing to the international market. I don't know. I mean, Michelle Yeoh is from Malaysia. She's Malaysian Chinese, so she's an international actress to begin with. But when we're discussing who are people you'd like to see cast in this, I'd like to see Michelle Yeoh. I have no idea how they could get someone that big. Because right now HBO doesn't even want to admit this prequel exists. But more so than the other two POV characters, there was a lot to unpack with this, and it really impressed me with not just the racial diversity and how it made sense, but, well, she's deceptively matronly, even though she's a politician. You mean like Olenna, book Olenna, Alysanne Targaryen, book Sansa, all of these great characters that George R. R. Martin wrote, and I'm pretty sure he came up with the main characters in broad strokes. That they said he came up with the broad strokes for it, and then we filled it in. And that even if he only did it in broad strokes, that the writers, that the series Bible keeps saying we're trying to copy the feel of the books. That they really gave me the impression they want to recapture that tone, like Avasarala, who was also written by people who like Game of Thrones, the books. So this gave me a lot of hope, and that really these are the characters we were robbed of and that I want to see again. So please don't hesitate to share your thoughts on this in the comments below.